everyone. Today's encounter will be first in a series of encounters that I got from a law enforcement officer, not in my county, but it's a couple of counties over. And I've got 4 and maybe 5 stories I'll do over the next couple of months. Hope you enjoy them. He says, I'm a deputy for the sheriff's office in my county. For obvious reasons, I would like to remain anonymous. Although I have told this story to my boss and several other officers I work with, we are strongly discouraged from making a big deal out of these cases. As a side note, in talking to other departments around the country, I can tell you that the story I'm about to tell is not an isolated incident. Many law enforcement officers in rural areas around the South have had similar experiences. It is extremely important that we project and keep a certain image in our communities. Stories like this would diminish that reputation, so we just don't talk about these things. And while these stories are not everyday events, they do happen. A law enforcement officer is in a unique position to see a lot of stuff that the average citizen will not see. I have several stories I can share with you, and this is the first. I also have stories I can share with your listeners told to me by other officers in other areas of the nation. The names, places, and times I use here are not real, so as to protect the identity of the people involved and their families, but this story is true. I wrote the incident report and filed it. The report has been removed from our filing system by someone, I don't know who. I made a copy of this and other strange things we have seen around here so that I have a record. I'm going to share them with you now. A few years ago, our dispatcher got a late night call from an elderly woman, Mrs. Keeler, who lived far out in the county. The woman told the dispatcher that she had let her dog out to go pee and that the dog had not come back. She further stated that she thought, quote, that big man had taken her dog. The dispatcher tried to get Mrs. Keeler to tell her about the man. To the dispatcher, the dog was not important at this point. Mrs. Keeler had dementia. I have known her and her family since I was a boy. I went to high school with 2 of her children. We spent a lot of time at the Keeler home when I was young. She is one of the nicest women I know, always sweet to all of us crazy teenagers, and I never heard her say a bad word about anyone. Mr. Keeler died several years ago, and all of her children except one had moved away. Her daughter, who had stayed, lived with her mother, helping around the house and watching after Mrs. Keeler. Without her help, Mrs. Keeler would have had to be admitted to a nursing home. Physically, she was fine, but the dementia had taken a toll on her rational thinking. She could no longer carry on a rational conversation, and her short-term memory was all but gone. On this night, her daughter, a nurse at the local hospital, was working the night shift and would not be home until the morning. Our dispatcher got as much information as she could and tried to keep Mrs. Keeler on the line, but all the dispatcher got from her at the end of the call was to hurry up and send the sheriff to look for her dog and to run that big man out of her yard. I heard the call and responded immediately. I had finished helping the highway patrol with a car accident and had just got back into my squad car. This was during the early fall, and a cold front was moving through the area. We were experiencing heavy storms and rain. I was not the closest car to the location, but I thought I could get there quickly, so I responded. The Keeler family home is way off in the sticks. Mr. Keeler built the house away from everything to get away from the traffic and the crowd. If you didn't know where they lived, it would be hard to find. I made my way onto the gravel road that led to their drive. I think it took me 20 minutes to get there. Their gravel drive was long, and I could not see the house when I turned in. But after 100 yards or so, I could finally see the porch light was on. I pulled up to the house and shined my spotlight all around to get an idea of what I was dealing with. I saw no one. Getting out of the car, I noticed that the front door of the house was open. That is where I would start. I drew my weapon and entered the home. Making a thorough search, I found nothing. I walked around the house, which was lit well with floodlights all around, and I still could not find Mrs. Keeler or anyone in the area. I stepped back onto the porch out of the pouring rain and called the daughter from my cell phone. I explained the situation and asked if she had any idea where her mother would have gone. She told me that her mother was bad about getting out on the property and getting turned around. She would get lost 50 feet from the house. Just then, another squad car pulled into the drive and parked next to my car. The officer saw me on the porch and walked up. I told him what was going on and then directed my attention back to the phone call with Mrs. Keeler's daughter. She told me to walk straight back behind the house and follow the old trail that led to the barn. She could have walked back there looking for the dog, the daughter said. She said she would be home in 30 minutes. Myself and the other deputy quickly found the barn. The rain was coming down in sheets and we were soaked. We shined our lights around the front of the barn and again we saw nothing. We split up and each walked around the back of the barn. There was an open area to the left of the barn which he took, and the other side of the barn was up against the woods. That is the side I took. As I approached the corner, I took a quick peek around the corner without shining my light, not knowing what I was up against. I could see Mrs. Keeler standing in the rain at the back corner of the barn. She had a bright-colored nightgown on, which made her stand out in the dark and the rain. I clicked my radio and told my partner what I could see. He was not at the back of the barn yet. We didn't want to startle Mrs. Keeler, so we took it slow. Just then, I saw something move in front of Mrs. Keeler. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could see that she was looking up, standing very still, and I could hear her voice. She was talking to someone. My partner and I were frozen in place. It looked like we had a large male that should not have been there. My partner got into position on the other side of the barn. He would light up the area, and I would stand by in the darkness to see what we were dealing with. When he hit the light, my heart almost fell out of my chest. Standing in front of her was a 7 to 8 foot tall dark brown figure. Mrs. Keeler and this thing were face to face. My partner yelled at the figure to stay where he was when he turned his light on. That is when I could see clearly what this thing was. It was a Bigfoot. I could see its face. This thing was really big and broad. Then I saw the thing drop something white and lower itself on all fours, and like a flash it was gone. Over the noise of the pouring rain, I could hear branches breaking as it moved away. I also heard it roar for the first few yards that it moved. I quickly hit my light illuminating Mrs. Keeler and rushed over to her. She was afraid and very confused, but I think she was startled by my partner and I, not necessarily the creature she had been standing in front of. My partner stood between us and the area that the creature had run, covering us, while I talked to Mrs. Keeler. She was looking around on the ground like she had lost something. Then she saw her dog. It was one of the small white dogs that old women like to have as companions. She picked the dog up and finally told me to get her out of this hurricane. I smiled and walked her back to the house and got her inside while my partner stood on the porch waiting for the daughter, who arrived within a few minutes. He explained what had happened to her mother and where we had found her, but he did not say anything about the creature we had seen. I never mentioned it either. It was too crazy to get into until we could figure out what we had seen, and there was no need to terrify her daughter. We stayed while Mrs. Keeler's daughter got her mother dried off and into some warm clothing. Mrs. Keeler thanked us for coming out. She seemed to have her wits about her at this time and seemed embarrassed that we had seen her in her nightgown. Of course, we told her it was nothing and to call us for anything she needed in the future. As we were leaving, she said the strangest thing. She told us to thank the big man for giving her dog back. We all stood on the front porch and just looked at each other in silence. The daughter finally looked at me and pointed to her own head as if to say it was the dementia. This was my first encounter with a Bigfoot. I had no idea they were here, but they are.